The fluorescent lights of Nexus 7 flickered momentarily as Marcus Chen's magnetic boots carried him along the curved maintenance corridor of the station's outer ring. His tool belt clinked softly against the metal walkway, the sound barely audible over the constant hum of life support systems. Through the reinforced viewport to his right, the endless expanse of space stretched out before him, dotted with distant stars and the occasional flash of ships arriving through the nearby jump point. The space station's maintenance chief had once joked that Marcus could probably navigate these tunnels blindfolded. He wasn't wrong. After 3 years of methodically checking every panel, replacing every faulty circuit, and maintaining the labyrinth of systems that kept the station's inhabitants alive, Marcus knew every inch of Nexus 7. What the chief didn't know was that mapping escape routes and understanding structural weaknesses had been drilled into Marcus long before he ever picked up a maintenance manual. A series of rapid clicks echoed through his earpiece, the station's central computer alerting him to another malfunction in Environmental Control Section 17. He adjusted his course accordingly, his movements efficient and purposeful. As he passed through the bustling commercial district, aliens of various species barely noticed him. To them, he was just another human worker, unremarkable among the countless maintenance staff that kept the station running. The Drachnid merchants haggling over rare mineral rights barely glanced his way. The Varaxian diplomats, with their crystalline skin refracting light in complex patterns, continued their heated debate without pause. Even the station's security forces, a mix of various species deemed physically imposing by council standards, simply nodded as he passed their checkpoints. His maintenance ID was scanned, verified, and forgotten in seconds. Marcus preferred it this way. Invisibility was a tool he had mastered long before it became his shield. As he worked on the malfunctioning environmental controls, his hands moved with precise efficiency. A nearby Silurian child watched him with 4 curious eyes, fascinated by the sparks from his repair work. Marcus offered a gentle smile, the kind that put others at ease, that reinforced his image as harmless, helpful, human. "You're good with tools," the child observed in halting standard English. "Practice," Marcus replied simply, his voice carrying the soft tone he had cultivated over years. Not too confident, not too hesitant. Perfect average. The child's parent called them away, and Marcus returned to his work. His fingers traced the familiar patterns of wires and circuits, but his mind cataloged the changes in station security patterns he'd observed during his shift. 3 new guard rotations in the diplomatic sector, increased weapons scanning at the docking bays, subtle signs that something had the station authorities concerned. A commotion near the commercial district's main thoroughfare drew his attention. A group of Kravak warriors, their scaled armor gleaming under the artificial lights, were pushing their way through the crowd. Their hands stayed close to their weapons, their posture radiating aggression. Marcus continued his work, but his peripheral vision tracked their movement, noting their formation, identifying vulnerabilities out of habit. "Hey, human," one of the Kravak called out, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among their species. "The temperature controls in our quarters are malfunctioning again. Your kind's incompetence is becoming tiresome." Marcus looked up slowly, his expression neutral. "I'll add it to the maintenance queue," he replied, his voice level. "Standard response time is 4 to 6 hours. The Kravak's secondary arms twitched, a sign of annoyance. "Perhaps we should file a formal complaint about the quality of human workers on this station. Surely there are more capable species available for such tasks." "That is your right," Marcus answered, returning to his work. His hands never paused in their movement, never betrayed the instant calculations his mind had made. 3 Kravak warriors, 7 different ways to incapacitate them using just his current tools. 12 potential civilian casualties if they drew weapons, all assessed and dismissed in the time it took him to reconnect a power coupling. The Kravak warriors moved on, already forgetting the unremarkable human maintenance worker. They never noticed how he had positioned himself between them and the Silurian child, nor how his stance had subtly shifted to one that could transition from repair work to combat in a fraction of a second. As his shift progressed, Marcus noted more subtle changes in the station's rhythm. The security forces were tenser than usual, their patrols more frequent. The merchants in the commercial district were closing earlier, their conversations hushed. Something was coming. He could feel it in the way the station's more sensitive species were reacting, in the increased military traffic through the nearby jump point. When his shift ended, Marcus made his way back to his quarters in the civilian sector. The small room was sparse, functional, exactly what everyone would expect from a maintenance worker's living space. Only he knew about the hidden compartment beneath his bed, containing equipment that would raise serious questions about a simple maintenance worker's past. As he reviewed the day's security footage he had quietly archived, his terminal chimed with an incoming priority alert. A fleet of unregistered ships had just emerged from the jump point, their intentions unknown. Marcus watched the grainy footage, his expression unchanging as he recognized the ship's design. He had encountered their kind before, in another life, on a battlefield everyone wanted to forget. The station's warning klaxons remained silent, but Marcus knew the quiet wouldn't last. He began his preparations, carefully maintaining his routine while setting contingencies in motion. Tomorrow, he would go about his maintenance rounds as usual, fixing environmental controls and checking power systems. But tonight, he would ensure his hidden equipment was ready, his escape routes clear, his plans in place. Because Marcus Chen, the unremarkable maintenance worker of Nexus 7, had learned long ago that peace never lasted. And when it shattered, survival depended on being prepared. As he settled into his bunk for his designated sleep cycle, his mind was already gaming out scenarios, mapping strategies, preparing for the moment when the facade of the simple maintenance worker would need to fall away. The station's lights dimmed for the night cycle, and Marcus Chen, once known by another name that still inspired fear in certain corners of the galaxy, closed his eyes. But like always, he didn't truly sleep. He waited, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring to the supposedly peaceful halls of Nexus 7. The dreams always came in fragments. Flashes of plasma fire against the void of space, the weight of command decisions that sent good soldiers to their deaths, the final battle that had forced him to disappear. Marcus woke from his light sleep as he always did, instantly alert, no trace of grogginess. His quarters were still dark, but his internal clock told him it was nearly time for his shift. The station's news feeds were already buzzing with speculation about the unregistered ships. Official channels claimed they were simply independent traders who had forgotten to update their registry. Marcus knew better. He recognized the subtle signs of a station preparing for trouble: increased security patrols, tighter scanning protocols at all airlocks, nervous energy among the diplomatic corps. As he made his way through the morning crowd, a new face caught his attention. A tall, slender figure in Investigation Corps armor, Zarak, according to the credential badge. Her species, the Talixi, were known for their investigative abilities and near-perfect recall. Her presence confirmed his suspicions that station authorities were more concerned than they publicly admitted. The investigator's path intersected with his as he worked on a faulty pressure regulator. Her 4 eyes studied him briefly before moving on, but that glance told him everything he needed to know. She was mapping the station's personnel, creating a mental database of everyone who might be relevant to whatever she was investigating. As he worked, his mind drifted to another time, another station. He had been Commander Chen then, leading Earth's most elite Special Operations Unit. Their mission had been simple on paper: investigate disappearances along the frontier. The reality had been far more complex. His team had uncovered something that changed humanity's understanding of their place in the galaxy. A burst of static in his earpiece pulled him back to the present. Another maintenance request, this time from the diplomatic sector. As he gathered his tools, he noticed something odd in the request pattern. 3 calls from the same sector in the past hour, each from a different system, but with similar reported issues. To anyone else, It would seem like a cluster of unrelated malfunctions. To Marcus, it was a pattern. The diplomatic sector was quieter than usual when he arrived. The normal bustle of ambassadors and their staff was replaced by an uneasy stillness. As he worked on the reported malfunction, his enhanced hearing picked up fragments of worried conversations from nearby offices. 3 diplomatic aides had failed to report for duty this morning. Security was quietly investigating. Unusual number of malfunctions today, a voice observed behind him. It was Zorak, the investigator he'd noticed earlier. Her tone was casual, but her stance was anything but relaxed. Environmental systems can be temperamental, Marcus replied, his voice carrying just the right amount of apologetic concern. Especially with so many species requiring different atmospheric conditions. Indeed, her upper eyes focused on his work while her lower set studied his face. You've been stationed here long. 3 years, he answered, neither too quickly nor too hesitantly. Standard maintenance contract. She nodded, but something in her posture told him she wasn't entirely satisfied with his answer. As she walked away, Marcus continued his work, but his mind was already connecting dots. The disappearances, the unregistered ships, the increased security. It was all connected to something he'd seen before. During a brief break in his shift, he accessed the station's public records through his maintenance terminal. 3 similar incidents had occurred on other stations in the past year. Each time, the pattern was the same: unexplained malfunctions, missing personnel, mysterious ships. Each time, station authorities had classified the incidents as isolated events. But Marcus knew better. He'd seen this pattern 15 years ago, during his last mission as Commander Chen. His team had tracked similar disappearances across 5 sectors, following a trail that led them to a discovery that still haunted his dreams. The mission that had forced him to become Marcus Chen, maintenance worker. As he moved through his daily rounds, he began gathering intelligence. His maintenance access allowed him to place small sensors throughout the station. Nothing that would trigger security sweeps, just simple diagnostic tools that could be repurposed to monitor movement patterns and atmospheric changes. To anyone checking, they would appear to be standard maintenance equipment. The day shift was ending when his first sensor picked up an anomaly. A slight fluctuation in the air pressure of Cargo Bay 7, too small to trigger station alarms, but noticeable to his calibrated equipment. He filed it away with his growing collection of data points, building a picture that was becoming clearer with each passing hour. In his quarters that night, Marcus accessed a secure channel he hadn't used in years. The encryption was old but unbreakable, designed by Earth's best cryptographers for exactly this kind of situation. The message he sent was brief, just a series of numbers that would mean nothing to anyone except a very select few. As he prepared for another light sleep cycle, his mind wandered to his old team. They had scattered after that last mission, each taking on new identities, blending into the vast human diaspora across the galaxy. He wondered if any of them had noticed the pattern too, if they were also watching and waiting. A soft chime from his terminal interrupted his thoughts. The response to his message was equally brief. Another series of numbers that confirmed his worst fears. What he'd discovered 15 years ago hadn't ended with his team's disappearance. It had merely gone dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The station's night cycle hummed around him as Marcus Chen, maintenance worker, began preparing for a war that only he knew was coming. Somewhere above him, in the vast structure of Nexus 7, something was hunting. And this time, he wouldn't have a team backing him up when he faced it. But first, he needed proof. Tomorrow, he would begin tracking the hunter while maintaining his cover. The station's residents would continue to see only Marcus Chen, the quiet maintenance worker who kept to himself. None of them would notice how his tools could double as weapons, or how his maintenance routes always seemed to intersect with the areas where people had disappeared. The lights dimmed automatically, leaving him in darkness. In the shadows, Marcus allowed himself a moment of grim anticipation. The hunters had no way of knowing that their prey included someone who had once been their worst nightmare, someone who had sacrificed everything to keep their existence secret, someone who was ready to do it again. The maintenance shaft echoed with the soft pulse of the station's heart, the rhythmic thrum of machinery that kept everyone alive. Marcus moved silently through the narrow space, his boots magnetized just enough to keep him stable without making sound. His sensor pad showed another atmospheric anomaly, the fourth one in 2 days, this time in a supposedly sealed section of the cargo level. The station's night cycle was in full effect, most of the regular crew asleep or confined to essential operations. Perfect hunting conditions. Marcus had seen it before. The patterns were unmistakable now. The hunters always struck during the quiet hours, when witnesses were few and security was stretched thin. His maintenance override gave him access to the cargo-level security feeds. The official cameras showed nothing unusual, but Marcus noticed the subtle signs of tampering. Micro-delays in the footage, fractional skips that anyone else would dismiss as routine digital artifacts. He'd helped design similar countermeasures during his previous life. A soft click in his earpiece, one of his modified sensors detecting movement where there should be none. He switched off his official comm link, allowing himself to fully focus on the hunt. The cargo level spread out before him like a maze of containers and loading equipment, all bathed in the dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows perfect for concealment. The first sign was subtle, a shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot metal. But the environmental controls kept the station's temperature strictly regulated. Marcus pressed himself against a cargo container, becoming one with the shadows. Years of training took over as he watched the distortion move, remembering similar encounters from his past. Security breach in Cargo Section 8B, the station's AI announced suddenly, its synthetic voice echoing through the empty corridors. Marcus knew it wasn't a coincidence. The hunters were herding potential prey, using the station's own security protocols to direct traffic away from their hunting ground. His modified sensor pad vibrated. Another atmospheric fluctuation, closer this time. The hunter was near, probably using the same kind of advanced camouflage technology his team had encountered years ago. But technology had weaknesses, and Marcus had spent years learning them. A scraping sound, metal on metal, echoed from his left. Most would have dismissed it as the station's normal creaks and groans, but Marcus recognized the deliberate pattern. The hunter was testing responses, looking for signs of awareness among potential prey. He reached slowly into his tool belt, fingers wrapping around what appeared to be a simple diagnostic scanner. Like everything else he carried, it had been modified for occasions exactly like this. The device could detect the subtle electromagnetic signatures given off by active camouflage systems. The scanner's display confirmed his suspicions. The hunter was using a third-generation stealth system, more advanced than anything officially known to exist. But the physics remained the same. The energy required to bend light created a detectable field for those who knew what to look for. A shadow moved wrong, and Marcus reacted instinctively. He dropped and rolled as something whistled through the air where his head had been. The hunter's camouflage flickered for a moment, revealing a glimpse of its true form, sleek, armored, and definitely not from any known species. Marcus came up in a fighting stance, his diagnostic tool already reconfigured into a makeshift weapon. The hunter's surprise was almost palpable. Its prey wasn't running, wasn't panicking. Instead, it faced something that knew exactly what it was dealing with. The fight was brief but intense. The hunter moved with inhuman speed, its camouflaged form a blur of motion and deadly intent. But Marcus had fought their kind before. He knew their patterns, their preferences, their weaknesses. His seemingly random movements were calculated to disrupt the hunter's stealth field, forcing it to expend more energy to maintain its invisibility. A swift exchange of blows ended with Marcus driving his diagnostic tool into a specific point in the hunter's armor, a vulnerability he remembered from past encounters. The creature stumbled, its camouflage failing completely. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus stood face to face with a nightmare from his past. The hunter was exactly as he remembered. Biomechanical armor grafted to a form that had evolved for pursuit and killing. Its faceted eyes regarded him with what might have been surprise before it activated its emergency transport system, disappearing in a flash of band technology. Marcus quickly gathered his equipment, erasing all traces of the confrontation. The station's security would be arriving soon, drawn by the energy spike from the hunter's departure. By the time they arrived, they would find only Marcus Chen, maintenance worker, calmly checking environmental systems after an apparent malfunction. But the encounter had confirmed his worst fears. The hunters hadn't just returned, they had evolved. Their technology was more advanced, their methods more sophisticated. And if they were here on Nexus 7, it meant they were planning something big. As he made his way back through the maintenance shafts, Marcus accessed his secure channel again. The message he sent this time was longer, detailed specifications of the hunter's new capabilities, weaknesses he had observed, tactical assessments that only a warrior would understand. His old team needed to know what they were facing. The station's day cycle was beginning as he emerged from the cargo level. The regular crew would be waking soon, going about their routines, unaware of the predator that had stalked their halls during the night. Marcus joined the early shift workers, just another maintenance technician starting his day. But his mind was already planning, analyzing, preparing. The hunters never worked alone. Where there was one, others would follow. And now they knew that someone on the station could recognize them, could fight them. The game had changed. In her office, investigator Zorak reviewed the night's security footage. Her species-enhanced vision caught the subtle discrepancies that others might miss. Her gaze lingered on the maintenance worker, Marcus Chen, noting how his movements seemed too precise, too practiced. Something about him nagged at her investigator's instincts. The hunt had begun, but now both sides were stalking their prey. And Marcus knew that soon he would have to decide. Maintain his cover and watch as the hunters claimed more victims, or risk everything to stop them once and for all. The emergency alert rippled through Nexus 7's communication systems just as Marcus was finishing a routine repair in the hydroponics section. Medical Bay 7 had gone into sudden lockdown, with reports of armed intruders taking control of the facility. Initial estimates suggested at least 30 civilians trapped inside, including patients from 12 different species. Marcus's hands continued their work on the environmental controls, but his mind was already analyzing the situation. Medical Bay 7 was strategically significant. It contained the station's primary quarantine facilities and advanced medical equipment. More importantly, it had direct access to the station's central computer through its medical database systems. The station's security forces had already established a perimeter, but Marcus could see they were out of their depth. The Kravak warriors who normally patrolled the corridors were held back by the hunters' superior technology. Even their advanced armor was useless against weapons that could bypass standard shields. Through his maintenance access, Marcus pulled up the medical bay schematics. The hunters had chosen their ground well. The quarantine sections were designed to be isolated in emergencies, with dedicated life support and backup power systems. They could hold out for days if necessary. All non-essential personnel, please return to your quarters, the station AI announced, its artificial voice carrying an edge of urgency. This is not a drill. Security forces are handling the situation. Marcus knew better. He'd seen how security forces had fared against a single hunter. Now they faced at least 3, possibly more, in an enclosed space with hostages. The odds were not in their favor. His earpiece crackled with encrypted chatter as he accessed the security channels through a backdoor he'd installed months ago. The hunters' demands were simple but chilling. They wanted access to the station's central database, specifically the records of all ship movements through the nearby jump point for the past 5 years. Chen. The voice behind him belonged to investigator Zorak. She had approached so quietly that even his enhanced senses hadn't detected her. Interesting that you're still working during a station-wide emergency. Systems still need maintenance, he replied, his voice carefully neutral. Especially during emergencies. Her 4 eyes studied him intently. I've been reviewing station records, she said. Did you know that environmental malfunctions dropped by 37% during your shifts? That's statistically improbable. Marcus continued his work, but his mind raced through scenarios. The investigator was too close to the truth. But before he could respond, another emergency alert blared through the station. The hunters had accessed the medical bay's quarantine controls. They were threatening to expose the entire section to hard vacuum if their demands weren't met. "Excuse me," Marcus said, gathering his tools. "Environmental systems in the medical sector will need attention if they're cycling the quarantine protocols." "The medical bay is sealed off," Zarak pointed out. "Security hasn't authorized any maintenance access." Marcus paused, letting a fraction of his true self show through. Then they're about to have a much bigger problem. Quarantine systems weren't designed to be cycled repeatedly. The seals will fail within hours. He could feel her watching as he walked away, her analytical mind putting pieces together. But he didn't have time to worry about his cover anymore. The hunters were forcing his hand. In his quarters, Marcus accessed the hidden compartment beneath his bed. The equipment he'd kept there hadn't seen use in 15 years, but he'd maintained it meticulously. The armor was still sleek, designed to look like standard maintenance gear, but crafted from materials that didn't officially exist. The weapons were disguised as tools, each one carefully modified to pass security scans. As he prepared, his secure channel chimed. The response from his old team was brief but clear. They were too far away to help. Whatever happened on Nexus 7 in the next few hours, he would face it alone. Through his enhanced access to the station's systems, Marcus watched the situation deteriorate. The hunters were systematically disabling security measures, using the hostages as shields while they worked to breach the central database. But something about their approach bothered him. They were being too obvious, too direct. Then he saw it, the pattern hidden in their actions. The database access wasn't their real goal. They were creating a diversion, drawing attention and resources away from something else. Something bigger. A soft alert from one of his hidden sensors confirmed his suspicion. While security focused on the medical bay, other hunters were moving through maintenance shafts toward the station's power core. If they reached it, they could do more than just threaten a single section with vacuum. They could decompress the entire station. In the medical bay's security feed, Marcus watched a young Silurian child huddle behind a treatment bed, 4 eyes wide with terror. The same child who had watched him work just days ago. Something inside him shifted, a decision crystallizing. His fingers flew over his terminal, accessing systems he'd backdoored months ago. With a few commands, he initiated a series of carefully planned malfunctions across the station. Nothing dangerous, but enough to create confusion, to provide cover for what he needed to do. As he made his way through the maintenance shafts, now wearing his true armor beneath his worker's outfit, Marcus knew there was no going back. His carefully constructed cover was about to be blown. But sometimes, he reflected, the price of remaining hidden was too high. Above him, the station's systems continued to flash warnings as the hunters pressed their advantage. They thought they had trapped their prey, forced them into an impossible choice. They didn't realize that they had just awakened something far more dangerous than they had expected to find. In her office, Zarak was putting the final pieces together. Her search through deep archives had finally found a match, a classified file from 15 years ago, containing a single image. It showed a human warrior, his face partially visible beneath advanced combat armor. A face she now recognized. Security cameras caught her running toward the medical bay. But she was already too late. The game had changed, and Marcus Chen, the quiet maintenance worker, was about to remind the galaxy why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space. The maintenance shaft above Medical Bay 7 was cramped, barely wide enough for a human to navigate. For Marcus, now fully equipped in his combat gear, it was even tighter. But discomfort was irrelevant. Below him, through the thin metal barrier, he could hear the frightened breathing of hostages and the measured footsteps of their captors. His helmet's display showed thermal signatures through the deck plating. 3 hunters in the main ward, 2 more guarding the quarantine controls, and another pair moving toward the power core. The hunter's stealth technology couldn't hide their heat signatures from his advanced sensors, not anymore. "Security, Chief," Marcus spoke into his comm, his voice no longer carrying its cultivated maintenance worker's timidity. "This is Commander Marcus Chen, Earth Special Operations, Authorization Code Sierra, Echo 794. You're about to experience some unusual system malfunctions. Do not attempt to override them." There was a moment of stunned silence on the channel before the chief's voice crackled back. "This channel is restricted to station security personnel." "How did you?" "Chief," Marcus interrupted, "in about 30 seconds, your sensors are going to show multiple hull breaches. They'll be false readings. When the emergency protocols activate, have your people ready to move on my signal." He didn't wait for a response. His fingers danced across the control panel on his forearm, activating programs he'd embedded in the station's systems over the past 3 years. Lights flickered, emergency sirens blared, and warning messages flashed across every terminal in the medical bay. The hunters reacted exactly as he predicted. Their heads turned toward the environmental displays, checking the sudden cascade of warnings. That moment of distraction was all he needed. The maintenance shafts panel dropped silently, and Marcus descended into chaos. His first 2 shots, modified stun charges that could penetrate the hunter's shields, found their targets before anyone registered his presence. The third hunter managed to activate its camouflage, but Marcus was already moving. Years of practice made his movements fluid, efficient. Each step had purpose, each gesture calculated. He wasn't just fighting. He was implementing a battle plan 3 years in the making. The hunter's return fire passed through the space where he'd been a fraction of a second before. "Impossible." The hunter's translated voice carried genuine surprise. "You're the maintenance worker." "I'm a lot of things," Marcus replied, his voice cold and professional as he moved through the medical bay like a ghost. His next shot caught the hunter in mid-stride, exploiting a weakness in its stealth field he'd identified during their last encounter. The hostages watched in stunned silence as their quiet maintenance worker transformed into something else entirely. His movements were precise, lethal, each action flowing seamlessly into the next. The hunter's advanced technology meant nothing against an opponent who had spent years studying their every weakness. Through his tactical display, Marcus tracked the 2 hunters heading for the power core. His fingers flew across his control panel, activating another set of predetermined system failures. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, trapping them in a corridor far from their goal. "Station security," he commanded through his comm. "Move in now. Quarantine section is clear. 2 hostiles contained in section C7. Used frequency setting Delta on your weapons. It'll penetrate their shields." The Kravak warriors burst in, their weapons modified according to his instructions. For once, their aggressive posturing was actually useful, drawing the hunter's attention, while Marcus moved unseen through the shadows. In her office, investigator Zorak watched the security feeds with all 4 eyes wide. The quiet maintenance worker had become something else entirely, a predator among predators, moving with a deadly grace that spoke of years of combat experience. Her search through classified archives suddenly made perfect sense. The last hunter in the medical bay realized too late that it was trapped. Its stealth technology, its advanced weapons, its tactical superiority. None of it mattered against an opponent who had spent 15 years preparing for this exact scenario. "You're him." The hunter's translated voice carried a mix of fear and recognition. "The Ghost Commander. The one who destroyed our harvest fleet." "That was a long time ago," Marcus replied, his voice carrying no emotion as he moved into position for the final strike. "I'd hoped you'd learned your lesson." The hunter's response was cut short as Marcus's modified weapon found its mark. The creature collapsed, its stealth field flickering out to reveal its true form. Around the medical bay, the hostages began to emerge from their hiding places, staring at their rescuer with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The young Silurian child from earlier approached cautiously. "You're not really a maintenance worker, are you?" 4 eyes blinked up at him curiously. Marcus knelt down to the child's level, his armor whirring softly with the movement. "Sometimes the best way to protect people is to hide in plain sight," he explained gently. "But sometimes you have to stop hiding." Station security was already securing the area, following his instructions to contain the unconscious hunters. The Kravak warriors who had once dismissed him now stood at attention when he passed, their posture showing a respect they'd never imagined giving to a human. But Marcus's mind was already on the next phase. The hunters trapped in the corridor were just part of a larger force. Their ships still lurked near the jump point, and he knew their kind never gave up easily. This wasn't just about Nexus 7 anymore. It was about preventing another harvest, another culling of innocence across the galaxy. As emergency teams began treating the hostages, Marcus accessed his secure channel one final time. The message he sent was brief but clear. "The hunters have returned. The Ghost Fleet must rise again." Across the galaxy, other maintenance workers, bartenders, and seemingly ordinary humans received his call. They had all been waiting, watching, preparing for this moment. The hunters had thought they were the predators, but they had unknowingly walked into a trap 15 years in the making. The quiet life of Marcus Chen, maintenance worker, was over. But Commander Chen's war was just beginning.